Peace, peace, peace. I am Phillip Roundtree, and you are tuned into the December 16th edition of Rhetorically Speaking. So I'm not going to play my traditional Dr. Umar video today because I'm about to say I have real doctors here. No, no, that's not cool. That's not cool because I don't want to. I don't know his credentials. Y'all know the argument about Dr. Umar. So props to those of you who are tuned in on Facebook Live. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube Live. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Even though the tuition for my daughter's education has went down because she is virtual, it's still kind of expensive. So in about 15 years, 20 years, I might be able to monetize this whole YouTube thing. And so that comes from you hitting that subscribe button. And last but not least, props to those of you who are tuned in on IG. You won't be able to hear our dope guests. So, again, make sure you go over to Phil MSW on YouTube. So, listen, we got a dope conversation on tap with some dope individuals who I reached out to one and one reached out to me. And so it's always a beautiful thing to be able to have healthy, productive, fruitful conversation with American Negro scholars. It's a beautiful thing. It's something that I definitely enjoy. And so today we're going to be having this conversation. And I know you see Jill Biden, but Jill's not even, or Dr. Jill, however you want to give it up to her. She's not necessarily the focus of the conversation. The focus of the conversation is just higher education, academia, and whether the prestige of a doctorate still maintains as it once did. And so, helping me have that conversation are some amazing people. First, we have Dr. Kenny Jones, who received his doctorate from Drexel University in Educational Leadership and Management. He's currently a college access expert for non traditional learners. And that woman you see over there, she's always making you crack up. She's writing a book. I'm waiting for her book to drop because she's always writing a book in her Facebook post. That is Dr. Kristin Austin, who is a lover of talking, teaching, tacos, and Target, the four T's. So she says she currently collects her salary and health insurance through work as a higher education administrator and faculty member. I didn't know if she wanted me to say the name of the university or not, because I have my one homegirl who works at that same university, and she said, Phil, don't say it. And I said it anyway. And then she got she got some feedback from some folk like, listen, we aren't affiliated with your thoughts, so please leave us out. So all right, I'm going to respect that. So,
Right.
but welcome to y'all. I appreciate y'all for coming through.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you.
No doubt, no doubt. So for again, y'all see, those of you who are tuning in, see, I'm a Dr. Jill by an op-ed conversation, and so unless you've been, under a rock or just feeling the effects of COVID, like many of us, I don't know how I stumbled onto the not trash, on the opinion piece by a Joseph Epstein, right? And it was an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal who that talked about, and I'll give you the name of the article. They're a doctor in the White House, not if you need an MD. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna briefly go over some of the points that he made in the opinion piece, and then get my panelists' feedback on it, right? And we're again, Jill started the conversation. She's the reason why we're here, but we're gonna definitely move past it because I have my thoughts on the current state of higher education. And so Joseph Epstein, when I first saw it, I said, whoa, Epstein. Like that name automatically rang some bells. And so I didn't want to put that on him because, it's levels to being, I don't like saying the word trash, but it's levels to being trash. Right? And so we could have a difference of opinion. You could have a potentially trash opinion, right? But still not be a predator like the other guy. And
Yeah.
exactly. And so with Joseph Epstein, just give you a little background on him. He worked 30 years as a professor at Northwestern. And when hot button issues and topics come out, people are going to be quick to disassociate themselves from you, like Northwestern did. They
Mm-hmm.
they said, listen, that's not our man's. It's like, wait, but y'all was together for 30 years, right?
Nope,
Like
not
Come on.
today.
like how does that work? And mind you, he taught at Northwestern, which is an important point. He with a bachelor's degree only,
Correct.
right?
We'll get to that.
Correct.
And so, which is again interesting in itself. And I and he might have talked about in the article what he taught, what his background is. But if it's anything related to writing, like a friend of mine said, Adiza Azel, who's I want to say her newborn is keeping her away from joining us today. Uh, it was a YouTube comment piece. And so I'm gonna go into these quick points so you all understand exactly where we're coming from today. So he starts off, Madam First Lady, Mrs. Biden, Jill, Kiddo. Bravo. I
First mistake.
I thought that was amazing actually. But again, we'll talk about that, right? We'll get into that.
Kiddo. Okay, go ahead.
Well, Kiddo is what Joe calls her, right? And so again,
Sure, but he's not Joe. But
he's not. And so, but again, if you're writing, you want to come off with the inflammatory comments. You start with it, right? You start with the heat.
Okay, strategically.
Exactly. That is going to get people like,
Okay.
whoa, Kiddo, right? Imagine Joe reading it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Kiddo. So, so he says, Kiddo, a bit of advice on what may seem like a small, but I think is not an unimportant matter. Any chance you might drop the doctor before your name? Dr. Jill Biden sounds and feels fraudulent, not to say a touch comic. Your degree is, I believe. All right, yeah. He drawn a little bit.
Right.
And
blatant disrespect. But please continue.
word.
Yeah, please
Uh,
read this mess.
I believe in ED, right? A doctor of education earned at the University of Delaware through a dissertation with the unpromising title Student Retention at the Community College Level, Meeting Students' Needs. A wise man once said that no one should call himself doctor unless he has delivered a child. Think about it, Dr. Jill, and forthwith drop the dot. He goes on to discuss his credentials ad nauseum. Then he talked about, and again we're going to get into this. He says the PhD may have once held prestige, but that has been diminished by the erosion of seriousness and a relaxation of standards in university education generally, at any rate outside the sciences. He talked about honorary doctorates like y'all man's, not mine, Bill Cosby, even though I still love the Cosby Show. The prestige of honorary doctorates has declined even further. Such degrees were once given exclusively to scholars, statesmen, artists, and scientists. Then rich men entered the list. Political correctness has put paid to any true honor an honorary doctorate may once have possessed. If you are ever looking for a simile to denote rarity, try, and I quote, rarer than a contemporary university honorary degree list not containing an African American woman. Word. So I'm gonna let y'all have it. So, what were your thoughts on the article? And since we ended with the African American woman, I'm gonna start with the African American woman, Dr. Kristen.
Okay. Listen, first, kiddo is problematic. I'm just gonna start from the jump. Kiddo is highly problematic. Yes, her partner, her life partner calls her that. That in no way invites the general public to then jump on that nickname unless she has made it known that she is comfortable with random Epstein's and random people calling her kiddo. Like that, the whole random. And like it's so patronizing because it's not something that you would typically call an adult at all, let alone someone that is going to be the first lady, let alone someone that has an accomplished career outside of her partner's career. Like was already making moves before she became the spouse of Joe Biden. So just calling someone kiddo, that in and of itself is it's like almost like he called her girl, like Jill girl, which again in a that piece, no. And then period, listen, I too think that honorary doctorates might be becoming a little bit too familiar. I'm going to give you higher ed context of why that is increasing. A lot of that comes from donations. A lot of that comes from the necessity to sustain institutions, to get buy-in from donors. So when you look at who is getting these honorary doctorates, very often, whereas it used to be that big honor that he's referring to. So I would agree, it used to be way more selective, but now it's like, what does the institution need and who can we get it from? And then how can we say thank you? You can't always name a building after someone. How many buildings you just can't always do that. You can't always have an endowment under someone's name because they require perpetuity. But you could say, I'm going to give you an honorary doctorate, and that goes a long way for them in terms of what they then will give back to the university. So I agree with him that they could be becoming a little oversaturated, but I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I have a doctorate, a non-medical doctorate. So it even feels othering to say non-medical, as though medical is the only way to get a doctorate. One other thing about the honorary doctorate, doctorates are the only fields that give them attorneys. You do not get an honorary JD, so that does send the message that, like, look, this is something that we may be doing a little too much of. So it's the only terminal degree you can get it with. And then they're also specific to the humanities. So you don't get an honorary doctorate in science. You don't get an honorary doctorate in, it's always in the humanities. So it also diminishes the field of social sciences and humanities, which is the foundation for every career. So there's that. But I use my title. I used it today, kind of tongue in cheek, but not. I use my title because it increases representation and it normalizes Black women achieving at the terminal degree level. Period. It normalizes it. The more people that see Black and people of color, brown people as well, with terminal degrees, the more it normalizes it, so that it doesn't get to a point where it's a rarity. In the circles that I tend to find myself in often, because I work in academia, it's not a rarity. A lot of the people I know have it, but when you step out of that, people don't. And those are the environments where it's important to show that it is a thing. So what you got, Dr. Kenny? I
Well,
don't know.
real quick, as the Xbox
Yeah.
just comes on out of the middle of nowhere, and it tends to do that. So, salute to the spirits who are here. I receive you, ancestors. Right. I just want to let the people know. Feel free to comment. You know, we definitely want to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts on
Yeah.
the situation. I'm not necessarily sitting here to pronounce that I'm right in my thoughts, and I don't think neither are they. We believe what we believe, right? But we love
Yeah.
to hear your thoughts, and it's always one of the reasons I have this platform. And I heard Dr. Carr say it over the weekend. He says it every weekend with Karen Hunter, right? We're just here to foster critical thinking
Yep.
amongst folk, something that, in my opinion, is lacking, especially at the higher ed level. But again, we'll get to that once we start the official Q&A. But feel free to drop your comments, so we can, know what your thoughts on this matter is. So what about you, Dr. Kenny?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think thank you, Dr. Austin, for those words. I agree, and I think it's very interesting. And before I get into my thoughts about it, I want to put out there first that I believe fundamentally that we live on one Earth, but there's 7.2 billion worlds, right? And so I have a world, and you have a world, and everybody else has a world in which they see the world. And so what that means is that when there's these sort of differences of opinions and it sort of impedes on your world in the ways that you see it, then we find ourselves in situations like this. So I find it very ironic that Dr. Jill Biden is sort of attacked as even an educator, right? And I think that really sort of illuminates, in my opinion, a very deeper rooted issue around how we as a society see educators, right? And so this stark disagreement with educators being called doctors, not realizing that doctors are educated by educators, right? And so it's sort of this dichotomy that people just forget out of this sheer, I don't know if it's jealousy, I don't know what it is, but it's like this woman has not only given of herself to study the minds of the students that she serves, and she's done it in a way that has always given back without expecting anything in return. And so for us to be able to now have this discussion about how we're standing with Dr. Jill Biden is illuminating a lot of things, of which I think we will get to later. Now, I'll also say that this opinion piece, and I'm happy that we all agree that it is disgusting. It really also, for me, helps me understand why misogyny is really pervasive, and pervasive in a way that it creates these larger conversations that now people want to have about scrutinizing education. I just think that there's something to be said about that, and the ways in which it was sort of blaring to us, which is why I think we're responding to it in this way. So, the entire piece in itself was just disgusting, as we all know, but it really honestly helps us to have these sort of conversations to really talk about why we should respect educators in the education space.
Word. I think my thoughts on the matter. Once I read it and I read it again, and then I read it just now prior to getting on. I've never read any of his work. Right. I wonder if he fashions himself like a shock jock, shock writer, akin to, I don't know if you've seen this Kevin Samuels video circulating, where he's talking disparagingly about a woman, calling her average, and I have my thoughts about that, but somebody had to let me know because I've never watched his videos, right? And this was my first introduction to him, and they said, oh, he's a shock jock, this is just what he does, in the same vein of a Howard Stern, of a Star from Star and Buck Wild, right? And so once I got past that, I started to realize that I'm starting to agree with some of the points that was made in the article. Now, when he talks about the idea of only medical doctors should be identifying themselves as doctors, I disagree. Right, I disagree. And a friend of mine, Dr. Travis Kinney, who I've had on the show, he talked about where here in America, right, in Western civilization, this is where they make that distinction of medical doctor or what have you. He talked about, I believe it was either in Japan or somewhere, where doctors are called senseis, right? And so the language, there's a difference between the two, and so there's this line of demarcation where, okay, we know who the the medical doctors are versus those from a philosophy background, right? So I got past that. We talk about this idea of misogyny. Now, do I think it exists within? And as Juliana Rachel said, props to you. She said misogyny is the framework. I agree, right? I definitely think that exists here, right? But I also think it's just a lack of respect for those individuals who attain this degree. And me, be the therapist in me, is like, I wonder why, right? You only having a bachelor's. Like, what experiences have you had to where now, and this is your viewpoint, or a viewpoint that you feel comfortable in espousing to to the public? So, well, I guess that takes me into my first question. Um, has the standards of higher education been lowered, diminishing the value of an advanced degree? And so he talked about that in the piece. I'm trying to just find it real quick. He said the PhD may once have held prestige, but that has been diminished by the erosion of seriousness and the relaxation of standards in university education generally, at any rate outside the sciences. And so the reason why I say I completely agree with them, right? And it's not necessarily endemic to the PhD, but just graduate level work in general. As you know, I can't call myself Dr. Phil yet, right? I'm just now in a doctoral program. But when I was, thinking about, applying to UPenn their DSW program, at the information session, they asked me why I was here, right? And the first thing I thought of was, and I felt like I coined the term credential inflation, right? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, at one point, having a high school diploma was enough. Then it was, okay. And then if you had a college degree, it was just like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. I think about how Dwayne Wayne was viewed on a different world, right? It was just like, oh man, he's just amazing. And so now with the for-profit colleges and everybody offering graduate level degrees. Listen, I'm a professor at Delaware State University, and I got no problem saying it because they know my feelings too. I say it right to them. I was thoroughly disappointed, and this was my first semester. I was thoroughly disappointed by the work that I saw from the students. But then I had to take a step back and I had to think about, the educational system that they're coming from, the impact of white supremacy and all of these different factors. I found myself up until, 2 minutes before grades were due, battling about what grade am I going to give this person, understanding like, I don't necessarily blame you, but I blame you. Right. And so and I blame these other professors too, because when you start asking me about why am I so critical with writing, and it's like, well, why hasn't everybody else been? And so we hand out these degrees, and I think it somewhat diminishes it. I know everybody has a master's degree, so it seems. So what are your thoughts on this idea that advanced degrees, graduate level degrees, have diminished of importance? And that's open to. I'll start with you, Dr. Kenny.
Okay. I just think that it's very relative, and I find it ironic that when we're talking about the relevance of education and how people learn things to become successful in life, it comes from some form of higher education. I think that we have to redefine it, right? And one of the things that I found in my research, and a lot of my research is in non-traditional learners and how adults are actually pursuing higher education at a faster rate than traditional age students. Why? Because Generation Z, as we know, they're going full speed ahead with technology and they're teaching each other, whereas people that are in the non-traditional space, sort of in those 60, 50, 40-year-old spaces, they're getting to these jobs and wanting to have to move forward and can't, because they don't have the credentials to be able to do so. So they come back to the institution in which will grant those spaces, but there's no support systems there. So I think that it's relative on how you define what is quality education, because what I think is great at CCP, maybe a Harvard professor may not, right? So we have to be very careful about how people celebrate education, and ironically, it was one of the implications in my own research. And as a society, we have to scrutinize how we reward and define education in 2020 and beyond, because there is no such thing anymore to teaching skills. Gone are the days where people even know how to write in cursive, for God's sake. So we have to be able to understand how to define what this term higher education means. Now, I can tell you from not only the research but the stories of the Black men who were in my study, being able to decrease the deficit in learning is really some of the bigger goals, and not necessarily about getting the degree itself. It's really about just having more knowledge and being able to pass that knowledge down to generations and not feeling like you're just stuck in the wind and being left. So we just have to redefine it. And I disagree. I think that, if we sort of redefine our focus to the non-traditional learners and understanding that learning does not stop at 20, right, or 23 when people graduate from undergrad. And I think you make a great point, Phil, about how we always feel like, oh, that's not enough, and that's not enough, and that's not enough. And I would argue it is because we ascend to more spaces, but we sometimes have to remember, and I, as a first generation college student from the hood, I always remember like, dang, like there's people and my friends that are still in the same houses that I grew up in, right? And so to them, we're untouchable, right? So we just have to redefine what this level of what not level, but this the impact of education and its importance is, in my opinion.
No, listen, I completely, I agree somewhat, right? I agree somewhat because I do think that, hence the reason, again, why we have spaces like this, why there's other spaces popping up where people are having, thoughtful conversations to push the bounds of what critical thinking is. Um, and so it's definitely necessary. Now, when we talk about academia and what it is, and maybe it is, but partially conditioning and this buying into white supremacy, right? That it's not necessarily for everybody. And so, and with that, there has to be a standard because if there's no, but and again, what we can, whatever this standard is, I know for me, I taught research and policy to grad students and research to undergrads. Listen, research we was learning as we went, as we went, right? Because even though I still had a good foundation, and I'm still trying to understand it. When it came to policy, it wasn't even necessarily about whatever the hell the book said. I could care less. I want to know your thoughts, right? How are you thinking? How are you processing? And so when you're getting feedback from me and it says, listen, that's just not enough depth, right? What does that mean? And it's because I'm trying to foster this idea of critical thinking because you can still get from me, you can still get a great grade is if you're trying to push yourself outside of the bounds of what the syllabus says.
I just really quickly, just to that point, to what end though, right? So you're pushing the critical thinking, yes, and I think that that's beyond important, but I think it's important for certain spaces. So, I would assert to you or pose to you, to what end are you pushing to critical thinking? What's the goal in your opinion? Is it the grade? Is it to be able to think critically when they get out here in the world? So to what end, in your opinion?
And so, for me, it's because I know what's needed out here in this world. Not even necessarily about it being job related, right? Like when I interviewed, it just so happened to be at HBCU, which is completely different. I go to Kutztown University. I think it would be a lot different if I taught at Kutztown University because a part of me would give less of a damn when it comes to it, but especially when it comes to people that look like me, right? I know what it takes, and even though I recognize that this system is bullshit, and I choose to operate outside of it, some of you choose to operate inside of it. And for you to thrive in that environment, it's going to be critical for you to look beyond the looking glass, if that makes sense, right?
It does, yeah.
And so I want to get your thoughts on it on Dr. Kristin. But just to let the people who are watching know, if you see my little cursor moving about, right, I don't know how to make it invisible so I can do what I need to do to see the comments and what have you, because we do have some dope comments that are coming in. Mike Luna said, being a doctor, period, is profound. The good homie Ben Giannakos. You gotta let me know, Ben, how to pronounce your name. 'Cause the one thing we could do to show respect to people is pronounce their name right. It said, I think it's important to address this closing statement of blatant misogyny. We're definitely going to further that conversation. As I said, Juliana said, misogyny is the framework. Let's see. Juliana says, again, graduate level work should not cause you to pass out and need water or cause trauma. It's become a business first, Mike says. No, and Daryl said, many of the people you described don't value doctorates at schools because growing research continue to expose the systemic racism within the academia. Completely agree. Completely agree. So we'll get your thoughts, Dr. Kristin. I see you with the thinker on. So what are your thoughts?
I know. Yeah, so statistically, just where we are statistically, terminal degrees have not reached the point of oversaturation in the market. It's actually been steady for the last 60 years. There's not been an increase and there's not been a decrease. What there has been an increase in is in for profit terminal degree attainment, but not and then a decrease in non for and so a nonprofit degree attainment, but the attainment has maintained. That's been for about 60 years. So that says a lot. So we can go there. But something that's interesting about the workforce and terminal degree attainment is people that have earned terminal degrees from for-profit institutions tend to stay in a certain uh, career bubble. You know, that may be mostly business oriented industries. It's a lot of leadership development, a lot of human resources. They haven't yet tended to be able to make the swing over into nonprofit education. So there's still very much a hierarchy there. So even if they're seeing an increase because of, for one thing, for-profit institutions get very well is virtual learning and online support, something that nonprofit education has not gotten. Well, even COVID has experienced that. For-profit institutions are thriving because they've been doing this already, and then the rest of us are like, our heads and water are kissing. So I would say it's not saturated at this point. It's definitely not. It may feel like it, but one thing I would say to that is it feels like it the more you get into certain circles. So everyone I know, I feel like I know, is a doctor, a lawyer, uh, name insert terminal degree, but that's because professionally that is the environment that I have now entered. But when I was in undergrad, pretty much everyone I knew was a struggling undergrad student. That was the norm, you know. So I think it's more that your environment tends to change and your circles and the things that you do tend to change. So it makes it feel like it's oversaturated. But so there's that one piece. The other thing that I would say is the cost of a terminal degree will eternally remain the gatekeeper because you cannot, it is very difficult to get comfortable financial aid packages to make it accessible for most people to get a terminal degree. Attorneys, holy smokes, the highest debt ratio of any graduate student is attorneys. Most people think it's MDs. It's not. It's attorneys. Um, so the cost alone kind of keeps the market down and keeps it kind of tepid because it's not accessible. I made the intentional choice to assume a tremendous amount of debt in order to earn my degree. I don't regret it. I regret the systems and the structures that created it to be that expensive, but I don't regret doing it. But that alone is going to keep the balance, that's going to keep the balance. Now, you know, there are a lot of models out there for free bachelor's degrees where the government or the city, wherever a student comes from, will pay for a student to get their bachelor's degree if they go to an in-state school. Those are environments where you look at the rates of saturation, they are so high. So when you look at Texas system or the UCLA system, it is very difficult for a graduate to get a job in one of those states if they come from those systems. But I could come from Pennsylvania and get a job in the UCLA system. But UCLA has a very difficult time of hiring their own because it's everyone. It is literally everyone because they don't have to pay. So there's those pieces as well. So I don't see oversaturation yet. I think it's possible, but as long as the cost stays at what it is, and as long as financial aid stays at what it's not, I can't see this being one of those oversaturated areas, not in terms of earning. And we're still 2%. People with terminal degrees are only 2% of the entire national population of those with post secondary degrees. 2%. Like that. And then you want to get into people of color. I think it's like 0.6% if you're not including Asian. So I mean, there's all that too, but Asian cultures have the highest degree attainment of people of color if you're counting them in people of color. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I didn't give thought to, or yeah, I didn't give thought to this idea of who you're surrounding yourself with, right? And the impact that plays on perspective with regards to it. So yeah, it's definitely, and I can only speak for the social work profession, right? And I doubt I can really speak for them. Um, but and I'm just trying to process it in my head. Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. Shout out to Harry James Drayton who's tuned in, and JC Hallett. And Shelley says the cost, that part. No, that part is very true when we talk about the cost of these degrees. I know I'm I'm paying out of pocket, right? This doctoral program, and so it was. I was like, you know what? Am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? I really had no idea because I've maxed out. I should have an MD the way my loans look, right? But it was just something I desired to do. And so, this teaching opportunity came up. So it's like rob Peter to pay Paul, right? So no, that's a very fair point when we're discussing that. Dr. Kenny, I know Kristen touched on it. This idea of honorary degrees. I know she discussed why they're necessary, and she made some very salient points. So what are your thoughts on on honorary doctorates?
I agree. I think that it's interesting that people see honorary doctorate degrees and the ways in which society, this goes back to my original point of how we award education and how we award certain words in education spaces, right? So, I'm praying for our brother Kanye West to come back, but at some point, when Kanye got his honorary doctorate, it was a shining moment to be like, you can call me Dr. West. And it was like, and I'm not a therapist, I defer to you, Brother Phil, but I'm sure that there's been some conversations around like what that meant in that space. But people don't know that universities see the honorary doctorate as an opportunity to get philanthropic relationships in that space. That's why Oprah has so many honorary doctorate degrees, because she has so much money, right?
Exactly.
So, when people see these honorary doctorate degrees, they think, oh my God, they must be some great humanitarian. And yeah, at some point they were, but the doctors were, the honorary doctors were, but then they shifted when universities started to see, well, we need money because enrollment is going down because non-traditional students are not coming to our campuses, they're going to community colleges, but that's a whole completely different conversation. So the honorary doctorate degree in that space, yes, I just will hope that everybody understands that it is not at all one of those things where even those of us that have doctorate degrees even recognize, because we know that it is something.
No, none of us recognize it. We don't know.
Nobody recognizes it at all.
No, it's something that you put in a bio. Like, let's call it what it is. It's something that you put in a bio. I have an honorary doctorate from.
That's why it's called honorary.
Right.
Yeah.
In a circle.
Well, tell the people in the PhD finished group about tell those people, right?
I'm in that group too. I asked
Wait, so they're recognized? They're saying like this is a thing?
Yeah, they are.
Child.
Not it's 20,000, but it's probably a couple hundred people that might comment on the post. I think it was around the time Waka Flocka, and again Waka Flocka got the honorary, and it was just like. But it was all. But what I noticed is it was people recently conferred, right? Where it's like they still have that trauma related to it.
Yes.
And
yes. So, you don't know what you're talking about.
I don't think that trauma ever leaves.
No.
I'm going to be honest with you. It is just one of those things. Even when we write, it's like, don't even want to think about comps. None of that.
Right.
None of that. I want to do it ever again. But yeah.
And I will add, though, that is not uncommon for other professional areas. You ask any attorney what the bar is like, it's traumatizing. You ask any MD what the multiple MCATs, because we hear, I have to do MCAT. No, they have to do 4 over the course of their career. So it's traumatizing too. But what people should understand is that an honorary doctorate now is a branding tool. It's no different than who was the rapper that got a special sandwich at McDonald's? Who was that? I don't know. Somebody got
Travis Scott.
Travis Scott, yeah.
The Travis Scott burger. So what that does is, okay, I don't eat McDonald's. It's not my thing. I like Chipotle, whatever. So if I like Travis Scott though, and I know that he has a burger at McDonald's, that's going to make me interested in that brand. So honorary doctorates now are used as a branding tool. It really brands the institution. Like, look at the people we have on our docket. And it is problematic, but it's also a tool.
Yeah.
And it does generate income, which does then cycle back into student success because we're able to use it for scholarships.
Yeah.
So
when I think about it, the biggest example, I mean, and he's somewhere behind the bars chilling, right? I think of Bill Cosby and how synonymous he was with Temple, right? And it put
Yes.
Temple on the radar for
Yes.
so many people, which
Yes.
do it benefit North Philly? I don't know, but does it benefit Temple?
Right.
Indeed, it does.
Right. The perfect example.
Perfect example. And any person that has a lot of money, universities are always inviting them to get honorary sort of like be consider like this opportunity, and because they want the money from that particular celebrity. So.
Yeah.
The other thing is that it's easy to take that back if there's a need to. So if you name a building after someone, I mean, think of how hard it is right now when these to bring certain monuments or how hard it is to do that in these different spaces. An honorary degree, you could just kind of like take it off the institutional record and then that's it. Like, so it's a less risky investment to get a lot back. It's a lot harder to get a building named after, a street named after, like all those things. Like, this is just 2020's, well, I would say this century's way of creatively generating income.
Yeah. Mike Luna says, well, give me my honorary. And listen, I look at Bloomsburg University, our former school, Kristin, and I see the Chick-fil-A, and I'm like, dang it, I put a lot of money into that Chick-fil-A. Like, I need free sandwiches for life. If you I like how the homophobic fries taste. You know what I mean? the homophobic.
You make concessions for the fries.
that
That's
milkshake.
for the waffle fries with politics sauce.
So Daryl comment, and salute to you, Dr. James Drayton. He says, no, mine was blood, sweat, and tears in all caps.
Yes.
Listen, props.
Yes.
Come on,
yes.
Dr. Drayton.
I see you, and you are seen.
So Daryl says, who was holding university presidents and boards accountable for tossing out honorary degrees? And then he went on to say, I don't have an issue with honorary doctorates claiming to be called doctor. I take more issue with universities carelessly handing them out for financial gain. It's time to think outside the box. And so I definitely think it's a valid point.
Oh yeah.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that I agree with that same point, and linking that to what I was saying earlier about redefining how we're rewarding education and how we're seeing it in our society. And I think that we're due for a rehashing of education in general, just an entire reform of it. And
burn it down,
all
start
of it.
over.
We have to now think about a virtual space, and now how we're going to be able to connect if we can't see each other, right? And now, are you effective in teaching people to be successful beyond this space when they have to go into it as an adult? We don't know what it's going to be like to be an adult in 20 years. So we're just sort of flying at the seat of our pants, really, right? And I think that we have to just be very careful about how we're defining that. Now, to the point about the institutions, yes, universities have always been a business, all the way from the time when they were started back from the Ivy League, times, right? It was all about how to generate better businesses for the societies in which we live. And so as we've grown and more things have become more accessible, right? We think back to the 90s when we didn't know people's feelings about anything because we couldn't see it, right? But now we can see everybody's feelings about everything. So we have more access to knowledge. And so so higher education had to try to like keep up. And right now we're not doing a great job at that. So we have to just redefine it.
No, we're not doing a great job at all. Yeah.
Word. And shout out to Lola, the blind one-eyed dog who is walking around here looking for food. I don't know what you're gonna do, Lola. I'm chilling right now. And I guess when we talk about honorary doctorates, I guess we should call her Dr. Mackenzie Bezos. Is she still going by Bezos? I don't know, but
Listen, she can go buy whatever
she
she
gonna get
want,
all the
write them checks.
Negro Negro doctorates that exist with her efforts. She donated. I saw on the website she donated 20 million to Dell State, 40
Yep.
million to Morgan
She get all
State.
the doctors.
Listen, call her whatever. What does she want to be
Call
called?
her
All
whatever
the
doctor
things.
she want to choose.
Whatever.
Whatever. She can pick.
So
Pick.
Andrea Garcia says schools are barely preparing the students now for careers. How do they further develop their offering to keep up with the times? So I don't know if that's a question or if that's a statement.
Yeah.
You would have lost.
Because
You would have lost 3 points from me. I would. You need to give me some type of punctuation. Miss
I
Garcia.
need
No.
context. Yeah, because I would push back against that because I would say again how, and this is to Dr. Kenny's point, how is she framing education? Because education and training are two different things.
Very different.
That is a very important distinction to make. Education and training are not the same thing. So I actually do think that the function of higher education is to develop critical thinking. Now again, whether or not we do that well is another point, but it's to develop critical thinking and to encourage students to live in a macro society, because K through 12 you are raised in a micro environment. Then you get to college and then all of a sudden it is a whole new country for most people. So those are the two sort of major functions. Your major should provide training and competencies for your area. If you are an accountant and if you want to be an accountant, you need financial accounting classes. That's the training. That may not be the education. So that's not the experience. So I do tend to push back when people say colleges are not doing their job or they're not teaching, because I just say, well, if folks are able to execute the role of an accountant, if you and I, Phil, are able to practice good pro-social, trauma-informed social work, we had the requisite training to do so. Education is a different, they're just not the same thing. So I would love to hear more from her about what she means by that, but I do push back there.
I agree too. I tend to push back too on that thought, because I think that there's a level of education and learning outside of the classroom that people don't know about, right? And you make an incredible point in that the purpose of higher education is to really give you practice on how you're going to be in society, right? This is why you have work studies, so you can understand how to balance your time. This is why you live in the residence hall with someone so you can understand what it means to live in a community of people that's different than you. This is why you figure out when you're going to eat and schedule your own classes so you can know how to figure out how to do your, go about your day as an adult. So, just because a student may not do well in, a major does not mean
an art class
or what, So we just have to, again, just be careful about like the purpose of what higher education is and what's really happening there.
No, I completely agree. I think about, I had a student, and it was an interesting semester to say the least, right? And when I first started, and throughout because I got like 75 thoughts going, so throughout the doctoral program that I'm in now in my leadership class, we have these existential conversations because our professor, shout out to Dr. Gervin, she's like an ally on probation. I don't call people allies because you're one comment away from being off probation, so you're always an ally on probation.
Same, and self-awareness too. Like I say that about myself. Like same. We're all in that space.
Facts.
Right?
And so I did a lot in our write up of what we got out of it. I said, I got stuff out of the leadership class or what have you, but it's really these conversations and these hard questions that I have to ask myself about pedagogy and different things. That's what I really got out of it, and I was tested this semester by a woman, non-traditional learner, didn't necessarily do the best, right? And I had to take a step back. I never wanted to be a gatekeeper of social work because I think the foundation of social work is on some bull job anyway, right? In the credit that's given to Jane Addams and all them people,
Right. The
right?
savior mentality.
Yeah,
It's built on saviorship. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I'm not a gatekeeper. And then I had to think about it, right? I'm like, this is a research class. Is she going to go into research? Probably not. It's a high likelihood she wants to get a more money from the job she's currently at with this undergrad degree. And who am I to stop her from doing that? Right now, if she was going out here to try to conduct research, all right. But now I'm like, you know what? Now, who am I to stop you from providing a better quality of life for yourself? But again, I am in this position as a gatekeeper, as a professor, and so again, it's this
You
constant,
still determine if they
yeah, this
pass.
constant
So
push and
Yeah.
pull that so many of us have to deal with, especially when it's regarding black folk,
Mhm.
and so yeah, it's interesting. So let me see what she says. Miss Garcia says the training does not include the application of the training. When they get to work, this is where the gap is and why the students are having problems gaining employment.
Yeah, and I think institutions are trying their best to really rethink and dare I say, I think they're like the public institutions are doing a better job of this than private institutions. Of really being able to say, okay, let's ask the field of where we're sending our graduates what they need. And so then we have to come back to our curriculum, and provosts are changing entire curriculums now, right? I was riding down 76 the other day, and saw like a whole medical marijuana degree being offered. And I'm like, what? Like, so I think that there's institutions really that are going out there to ask people sort of what is needed, and then coming back and really rethinking. And I'm gonna. This is not. And this is not a shameless plug for Drexel, but one of the reasons why I really appreciate Drexel is because I think what they do is that they just move with the times, right? And so if this is what's happening right now, then this institution needs to be able to adjust to this right now, and it moves in that way. So I think that if we are able to as I've been saying all night, to redefine it in that space, then it will make more sense.
yeah, and that what she's saying is very layered. A lot of it depends on the major. It depends on the career field, because fields that are in the sciences, those are typically clinical based 2+2 programs, meaning you're only on the physical brick and mortar campus for 2 years, and then you're spending your next 2 years in practice wherever you are, if that's medical technology or nursing. So I really I wouldn't make that broad statement about a lack of application. I also think that it depends on the school. If, as I work with college going students, I for those that I know that really need hands-on work, I make sure that one of their standards in choosing a college is one that requires an internship, because a lot of Gen Z don't yet have the autonomy to be able to, I'm sorry, not autonomy, the agency to think 4 years in advance and say an internship is going to be important. So they just don't always have that agency yet, and not every university requires an internship. If you go to a university with a major that does, that's going to really, first of all, the onus is going to be on the university to make sure you get one. So that's another insider thing. You don't want it to be tricky where it's like, oh yeah, we suggest it. When you see that, this is for anybody that's college going, that means that they're not going to help you because they don't have, there's no skin in that game. I'm sure they will encourage it. They probably have websites that you can search for an internship, but find me a school that requires an internship to graduate. I guarantee you that they will make sure you have one, because their success is also dependent on that. So I think there's a lot. I think application, I think, oh, one another point I would say is I've seen a shift in modern employment, where a lot of employers are starting to say, I want the soft skills. I
Soft
will
skills.
groom
Soft
that
skills.
person to what I want them to be skill wise, but I want the soft skills. So that goes back again to that education versus training. Uh, Digital media and digital technology, which is the biggest, fastest growing field right now, they want people that are Silicon Valley, and then they'll teach them what they need to know. So they're less. You did internship, doesn't matter. I'm going to teach you what we want you to know anyway, because we want you to know our proprietary information. So it like there's so many moving pieces here.
So many.
We're
No, listen, I agree. Let me see what the comments are saying. Lisa Montgomery says, "What are your thoughts about soft skills and how these fit into courses students take the major?" And I don't know if she heard you say that or is this while you were saying it. The major provides training, and hopefully, the work student do aids them with the development of the necessary soft skills, which also need to be in place for them to obtain. Yep. So she said, just asked about that, Kristin, with 75 exclamation points.
Yeah, and Lisa, that is Dr. Lisa Montgomery. So I want to fully give her that space as
Excuse me,
well.
Doc.
Yes.
Excuse
Well,
me,
yeah, well, you
Dr.
wouldn't have
Lisa.
known. I'm
And
just giving her
matter
that
of fact, we're
space
going to go
now.
right into that, right? We're going to go right into that. I was going to say something about that. Yeah, I'm working on my fourth degree. So, Shelley said, Lord, that money. Yes, Lord, the money. In my undergraduate class at Bloomsburg, we had to do we had to do two internships for social work, which I think definitely prepared me. In my second internship, I ended up turning into the full-time job working for the bull job place that is the Department of Human Services. Hello to you all. Now, when I got my second master's degree, which was a 100% online program, which was a master's in exercise science, I did have people in my cohort who were going to get into who were doing internships. Some people lived in that community to even work with the university at Cal University of PA. But here I am in Philadelphia, and it was that what you just talked about. We encourage it, but you're gonna get this degree whether you whether you do it or not. And what happened once I realized, okay, this I thought it was a field I was going to go into. I had to start sending cold emails out to Villanova and NJIT and
Yep.
different places, hopeful that I can get something right. So again, it's a cash grab for sure, and this is where we talk about this idea of taking ownership of your education. And so, yeah, their intro to practice experience, exactly. So this idea of calling oneself doctor, and so I say that now, not being having my DSW, but I think I'm gonna go by Phil, right? I'm gonna continue to go by Phil. I'm gonna have my students call me Phil like they do now. Um, what are your thoughts on this idea of you got to call me doctor? And is it dependent upon the space that you're in, the familiarity with the people that you're with whom you're interacting? So what are your requirements, or what do you ask when it comes to doctor? We see both of them with doctor in the Zoom, right?
That's right. That's right.
I'm gonna set them up.
That's right.
I was.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite questions, and I will tell you, and I'm sure you're thinking about this right now, Phil, because we're having this discussion. This is one of the questions that we all think about, even as doctoral students. Like, what are we going to do? Because everyone has their preference, and I liken this to, like, I find it intriguing how people are bothered by when one wants to be addressed a certain way, particularly when they have worked for that. Even if they didn't work for that, if I asked you, we're having a very loud national conversation around pronouns, right? And so if I would like to be called they in this Zoom, then why is it on the other person to be able to say, well, you don't get to have that distinction, right? And then I get to choose to ignore you, right? And so the way I see it is that I feel that people just should give people grace, right? Because if you have a nickname that you would rather be called, if my name is Kenneth, and I would rather you never to call me Kenneth ever, 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 ever. And I don't have to give you the reasons as to why I would not like you to call me that. And I would prefer you to call me Kenny, and I give you that information, and it is a respect thing, in my opinion, that you would just do that. And so I personally make it very, very clear that unless we have a very close relationship where we have had a space where you know me personally, then I am going to request that you just you use my preferred professional pronoun, which doctor is it. And so, and if not, that's fine. And then I just will not address you either, right? And so I think that, and my reasonings behind that are mine. They belong to me, and just like any pronoun or any preferred name is that person's story as to why they will ask you to do that is theirs. Now, I hear the people in the back of the room being like, well, what if I want my nickname to be doctor? Well, in that regard, you're just trying to be funny, right? And I think that, you know, in those types of minds, this conversation isn't for you. But I think that making sure that people just recognize that we don't have a lot of representation, even as educated Black folk in that regard, in those spaces.
That's it.
So we need to
That's
be
it.
able to say to folks, not only and forgive me, but don't forgive me. I made it a really good point for those people who didn't think that me as a Black man would be able to ascend to these levels. Oh, yes, sir. You're definitely going to put doctor in front of it, because it is sometimes as a community, people don't recognize that being sort of marginalized, not only as Black people, but even further as doctoral students. And so when we finish and we get to the other side, it is imperative that is what you're going to call me, because I worked so hard for it. And I'm even going to call myself doctor, right? And so if I give myself that respect, my mama said this to me, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say about it. My mama called me one day and she said, hey son, how are you? Oh, excuse me, doctor son. I said, Mom, you don't. She's like, now if I am going to do it, you best believe you better not ever apologize for asking someone else to do it. And
that is beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, so I don't go by Dr. Austin, except for when I am showing up in a space that I feel like I may have the potential to be mansplained or overtalked, whatever you prefer, to be invisible. When I feel like I have reason to be marginalized, I don't feel like I have reason to be marginalized, but if I'm in an environment that I think is going to attempt to marginalize me, I use it as a weapon both against the circle and for myself, a weapon and a protection. So my students, they all call me Kristin, but they do that because I feel like we're colleagues. I'm training them to be colleagues, and so I look at it that way. So I don't ask my students to call me Dr. Austin. If I am working in my official capacity, I do use it professionally. But then, like in joking ways, if I'm out and about, I don't. Like if it's like at a doctor's appointment or, things like that. So I use it to take up space. I mean that really, and as a woman, I have had it. I have experienced. So I've experienced a greater amount of erasure as a doctorate holding woman than I have as a Black woman in my entire life. So I have been in meetings with all men, and there was a Dr. Austin on the agenda, and they're like, where is he? Well, first of all, why that assumption? And he's here. Here he is. I have had numerous situations where my spouse is a cisgender male, and we're out in public, and if like we had name cards or something at an event, they refer to him as Dr. Austin. Just the assumption is made. So I have experienced an extreme amount of erasure as a woman holding a doctorate, and so because of that, I use it to take up a whole lot of space. Then the little tag on piece I would add, actually it's like a point A and a point B. I earned my doctorate while pregnant, while giving birth, and while having 3 children under the age of 5.
Right.
or 6 by the time of conferral. So they know, my children know what a doctor is because they literally lived it growing up. And so I feel like at some points it'd be disrespect to them, what they sacrificed even as small children, to not, to hide it. And hide is probably stronger than what I mean, but like they earned this too. And they're very proud of it. Like they will say in a minute, like, my mom is a doctor. And they'll say, like, she can't help you with she can't give you stitches, but like she can teach you. So they get it and they know. Um, so that, it's a representation thing. There was a mentor I had at Bloom, actually, and she was a woman of color, and I loved her so much. I looked up to her, and I never knew that she had a doctorate, and it would have been nice for me to know that. I just would have appreciated it because it would have all the more made it possible for me. Like, here's this person I look up to so
That part.
much,
That's
and she's just so amazing. Now you add to it that makes me want to go for it even more. So
yes.
those are reasons I use
You
it.
never know people's, like, how they're motivated, and we all 3 of us, I'm sure, can think of at least of 5 people who are pursuing higher education because we inspired them to do so. And so, I think that is,
Yep.
again, about preference and people's personal preference.
No,
Yeah.
listen. You definitely make salient points. Adiza says, plus, let's just call a thing a thing. His comments were also rooted in the patriarchy, for sure, for sure.
Absolutely.
I think when I think about this idea, I'm at a place, and I think I've always been this person, right, where if you like it, I love it. Right. I put on my post, I think a post that you commented on, or Kristen, where it says, if you want to be called doctor, I'm gonna call you doctor. Right.
Exactly.
I'm just
Yep.
not calling you boss. I'm not calling you sir. I'm not calling you
Yeah, we're not doing
master
that.
or mammy or nothing like that. Anything else is good. Now,
Right.
now, now, what comes with that? If you would like for me to call you doctor, just know I'm gonna call you it. But then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking you crazy as f, right? If we're at the basketball court, you telling me call you doctor, I'm gonna think some way about you. But no, I completely agree. And again, you brought up
Yeah.
some great points when we talk about the misogyny that in the framework that was within that article when and Dr. Kenny, when we talk about just this idea of all of us about being black folk trying to navigate these types of spaces where we're not necessarily wanted. However, y'all stole all of it from us anyway, right? And so now you're trying to push us out, but no, we're gonna continue to take
Yep.
up space. And so I know you talked about it a little bit in the when you gave your thoughts, Kristen, about this idea of misogyny that was in the piece. In particular, the statement about honorary doctorates and African American women, and just this misogynoir that exists when it comes to academia. So if you could just speak
Mhm.
a little bit more to that, and we'll get your thoughts as well, Dr. Kenny.
Yeah. I from what I took from that, oh gosh, it was just so layered. But it women of color are underrepresented, or we're already underrepresented as a community of color earning doctorates. Women of color are that slimmest piece of that. So there are actually more males that hold doctorates than are women, although the DSW is helping with that because more programs are popping up and enrollment is higher for women. So I think we still are seen as like this unicorn. And because of that, it makes it that much easier to make these assumptions again, like, oh, where's Dr. Austin, kind of in the room sitting next to you. I think it's easier. It creates an environment where it's the erasure is just so easy, as well as the second guessing. I've definitely had situations where people, when we're discussing education, people will ask me where I got my doctorate from when it's a table of 6 people and we're all talking and no one else gets asked that question. Like, oh, I'm the only one. Okay, well, I'll run it down, But so those little things that happens a lot. Another piece I would add to that is ageism. I think I look younger than I am, so that causes people to question it as well. Like, how could it be? How could you? So I'll do like little passive things to kind of throw in to try to age myself. Right. It sounds wild, but I'll literally say, oh, this is actually my 20th year working as a higher ed professional. So then it kind of frames like, well, she must be at least this old. So yeah.
What about you, Dr. Kenny?
Yeah, I think that it's just again this continual. It is just so annoying and maddening, the continual disrespect of Black women. It is just one of the things that I think. At this point, some people try to become numb to it, and for the gall of him to be able to write that in that piece, and knowing everybody was going to read it, says everything it needs to say to me. And when I think about even the incredible Black women
so
professors
we can,
I've had in my life,
know what your thoughts
those
on.
that have helped me along my educational journey, we all can think about that one or two Black woman elder who has a doctorate and comes to to the events, and her doctorate robe looks way different than everybody else's, right? And it's because she has decided that, I don't care what y'all putting on, I'm going to wear this. And so I just think that it is again an example of how easy it is for people or men to try to disrespect Black women in such a blatant way. He literally just was like, and nobody's going to have any issues. And so I was talking to Kristin earlier before we were coming on, and I said to her in the same vein, and that, Black women, it's great that we stand with Dr. Jill Biden, and that's a completely different conversation. But when are we going to start standing with our Black women doctorate holders? When are we going to start asking people to treat our Black women doctorate holders the same way we treat our white men doctorate holders? They got the same education and the same like 1 + 1 is 2 wherever you go. And so I think that if we're going to start standing, then we need to start to scrutinize these blatant examples of what is obvious. They don't feel like there's any reproach for disrespecting Black women in that way. So we have to hold up our Black women doctorate holders in a way higher light than anybody ever would.
Word, and shout out to my mother who was in pursuit, and it's never too late, mama. Right, she got some credits out there that's lingering. It's never too late, and you bored. I'm gonna put you on blast, and you bored. It got nothing to do, right? So why not? But she says, I think this discussion turned a lemon Epstein into lemonade. Thank you, doctors, and soon to be Dr. Phil. Appreciate you, mama. Yeah, and I think that was part of my initial response to all of this. I'm like, why are y'all giving this boy the time of day? Right? Like this, and again, this is where I talk about, this was quote unquote smart on his behalf, the way he started out the article, some of the language that he used, because if he was going to, because it's not noteworthy, right? You see, he's trying to, even though it's lost a little bit of steam, the Biden, Trump, and this whole thing. So, he reintroduces, the Bidens and some scrutiny towards them. And it's just like, okay, and all right, he said that, keep it going. Like, who are you? Like, why is what you're saying so important? And why are we so quick to, I am standing with Jill Biden? And that was a question that I posed on my Facebook. Right? Is it this idea of this self-aggrandizing type of moment for folk to just be out here and say, yo, I got a degree, right? Or what is it? Because I don't understand things like this. And that's just me. And maybe you can enlighten me. I don't necessarily understand why you put I stand with Jill Biden and all of this. Like, I think it's attention seeking. I think it's attention seeking. I think it's a way for you to say, listen, this is what I have. Which, listen, who am I to tell you not to, right? But let's call a spade a spade. This has nothing to do with Jill Biden. You're just trying to get your rocks off. And I prefer you to say that, just like him. This was a way for him to get his rocks off. He probably hasn't written in a while, and he just needed something to hit the mainstream. And so and we have one more question after that. So just what are your thoughts about that? I stand with Jill Biden. It's the first time I see a lot of y'all stand up for anything, but again, it's a
Well,
different conversation.
right. I was gonna say that could be true, but that could be a whole other conversation. I think there's two answers. One, if it is a moment of self-grandizing, I don't care. I don't care, because if a person needs that in that moment, give it to them. It doesn't cost me anything to applaud your success. It doesn't cost me anything to cheer you on. And I cheer on far more passive, ordinary things that if you need a moment and a stage and a like, I'm gonna give it to you. But that's also me as a person. Like, I'm a natural cheerleader in general. So if it is self-grandizing, that doesn't turn me off. B, it's that whole erasure thing. It's the invisibility thing. I loved seeing my friends and people. I didn't even do it. I was like, oh wait, I got to do a thing. Joe Biden, I'm with her, but I'm doing other things. So I didn't even get to do it, but I would have. But I would have done it for the visibility. I loved seeing my friends stand up like, oh yeah, I forgot that you did this too. Yo, one thing you will know, Phil, when you come through this and you have been through that traumatic experience, the only thing I can liken it to, and please, Divine Nine, don't come for me, which I think we're Divine 10 now, but don't come for me. I'm not Greek. However, from what I understand, Greek culture, what I understand is that unless you have done it, you cannot begin to imagine what it is like to be on the other side of those sands. So, grandize all you want. If you want to strut around in pearl heels, I'm going to give you your applause and your due. If it's attention seeking, I don't see attention seeking as a negative thing, because people seek attention all the time. Sometimes they do it with their writing, sometimes they do it with their design, their art. So to me, that's not a negative. But I like the fact that I Stand with Jill is an opportunity for visibility and awareness.
I agree. I did it, and I did it on multiple platforms, and I did it for the attention. Absolutely. Because I agree. I don't think that attention seeking, especially in that regard, is negative, right? We're okay with standing with the negative things. We're okay with standing with, if it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and we should stand with Breast Cancer Awareness Month, because we should be aware that we need to be doing something about that. But I find it very ironic that when we're standing up for something positive and being able to celebrate this incredibly difficult feat, my God, and doing it in a year that is complete trash, right? It's sort of like all of these lights at the end of the tunnel, because you never know who's watching, right? And that was one thing that I learned in my childhood. You never know who is watching. Somebody might be like, you know what, I thought I could never do it, but I saw Phil do it, and I see him just yes, Phil, absolutely go out there and post every single solitary time that you want, because you never know what that does for people. I agree with Kristin there too, is that might be stopping people from a mental breakdown, whatever that post is, right? And so that moment of being called doctor at the end, particularly because of the statistics that that Kristin gave earlier, we're not represented. And those of us that get the opportunity to do it, we celebrate it so hard every time we get the opportunity, and some of us don't. I think, again, it's just about preference.
You swayed me a little bit, right? a little bit. Maybe it's the I stand with Jill Biden aspect of it that turned me off a little bit, right? Like, and I can't necessarily articulate as to why, but it was. Again, I find more if it was for somebody else, right? And maybe because she's just this white woman who lives an amazing white life, right? And maybe that's part of it, right? So if it was I stand with Dr. Kristin Austin, that I would feel a lot different about it, because I can't lie, that shades how I view things like this, right? Because I think it speaks to a greater issue, like you brought up, Dr. Kenny, where we tend to stand for white folk, right? You know, a lot more than we stand for one another in these types of situations.
But I think that to that point, though, in addition that it's the same as like, and I think that what you saw, particularly for those of us that have been through that process, it was an attack on our own process, right? It was like, how did who? It,
I like that word because
right?
it definitely felt like an attack.
It felt like an attack. Like how many dissertations you wrote, bruh? And
Honey,
But did
how
it?
many how
it
many
did.
statistical
I
courses
can't
have you
speak to it.
taken?
Right.
So not so I'm just saying like that's why I think for those of us that have these doctorate degrees, we were like, okay, what you ain't gonna do
Right.
is say that what this degree is illegitimate because it is legitimate because
Right.
I went to every course, I wrote every paper, and so because this this white man all of a sudden who has an abstentia bachelor's degree, which white men get to fail forward, right? So regardless of why has the opportunity to be able to teach at an
30
institute
years.
bachelor's degree is that's a different live, but this is really more so about this idea of understanding that we are just so fired up behind like you're not going to tag this process, and that's what I think what you saw.
Word.
And I would add one small point to that as well. When you talk about the diversity in who we're impassioned to get behind, I'll give a few examples. With Jill, I felt attacked. Like, whoa, you're attacking a woman with a terminal degree and she's a higher ed professional. So you're just hitting me in multiple, and she's a mother. You're hitting me in so many spots. And I was highly offended. But then I think of like Stacey Abrams. Oh, I was standing with Stacey. She was my profile picture, everything, because it dialed into the fact of feeling marginalized. And then I think of like Demi Lovato when she made very public statements about her mental health crises. As a person who has had mental health crises, I want to stand with her because she's dialing into points that I identify with. So that's where the diversity piece comes in. I do know that historically, white America doesn't always back Black America. For this particular situation, it wasn't about race for me with Jill. It was about those other identities. And I'm like, no, you just not, because I know what I went through. I was writing while giving birth. Like, you're not gonna do that. So
Word. I think, and I see Juliana brought up saying the significance was the Wall Street Journal, and I saw comments at that time from people who were like, listen, especially with the Wall Street Journal, there's a thick wall between news and the opinion. The opinion has been conservative with the post that they made about, the op-ed that what's the fly on the head guy, Pence. Pence wrote an op-ed. They wrote an op-ed about China and how about the flu, and China kicked people out the country from the Wall Street Journal because they wouldn't retract that statement. Again, for me, it was the whites whiting. You know what I mean? But I understand how I can empathize with how that can feel as a personal affront to what it is that you've accomplished.
have to mention one other thing because I just thought of it. Sarah Palin was highly unpopular in many circles that I associate with, ascribe to, similarly identified demographic circles. Sarah Palin was not it for me. However, Sarah Palin has a child who has Down syndrome, and I have a child who has a learning disability or neurological atypicality. I identified with her about that. So anytime someone came for her about her being a mother or something, and it would infuriate me because I knew how hard it was as a mother to parent a child, that there are pieces of, well, you can't control anyone, but there are very specific pieces that you really can't control. So that's another example. Like, I would stand with Sarah Palin on issues that I identify with, and I would defend her as someone who is raising a child with Down syndrome. Like, who can imagine? That's one of those things. If you haven't been through it, how dare you? How dare you?
That's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
And maybe there was a little bit of to this word trauma, and I know we have to be careful about that for brother Phil, but when you think back to how how many nights you just did not have to yourself because everything just didn't make sense from all of the writing that you've done, and it just I think it ignited all of us because we remembered what it was like to struggle through it and to get to the end of it.
Now that you say that, nah, cause I had a 15 to 20, that my first ever in a lifetime due last week, and I was laying on the floor in the same spot, taking pictures and posting in my story, and I was hurt. I had the dog on my back and the cat sitting next to
Yes.
me, and I was going through it.
Yes.
So damn you, guy, Epstein
Yes.
guy. No, I feel that now. I felt
Yes.
that in my spirit. I had to, cause
The fetal position. Like,
Okay,
listen.
damn nice.
But like, did you even go to the bathroom? Like, did you eat?
Did you
Like,
eat
tell me,
today?
because listen.
Yeah. And so before we get to this last question, I definitely appreciate you both for taking time. We're going on almost an hour and a half, so definitely thank you for joining me. I did want to state because and this is of more significance, and it's unfortunate that this conversation wasn't had, and it didn't get the national press like this got. But those who tuned in on Monday to the show, and make sure you go to YouTube at Phil MSW and subscribe, or shoot me a friend request on Facebook. So I try to do this a couple times a week. Keontae Johnson, who young man from played Florida Gators college basketball, who fell unconscious in the middle of a game on Saturday. He had COVID in the summertime. He ended up more than likely he had myocarditis, which resulted in him falling unconscious. He is now speaking, and he's alert. He's out of the coma. So it's always because I talked where I left off. He was in this medically induced coma, so I wanted to get that out. That he is doing better. No way in hell they should be playing sports, but again, that's another conversation in itself. So back to this final question. So, what, in your opinion, what does the future of higher education look like, from a socially and academically? And either
I
one of
think
you can go for it. Go ahead, Dr. Kenny.
it certainly looks like educating adults. I don't think it looks like educating traditional age students in the next 15 to 20 years. I think it's really understanding how to prepare people to be successful in society, and if that is digital skills, Zoom skills. We don't know what those skills are going to be. And so I think the future is going to really, if we're going to keep this traditional idea of higher education the way that we see it in the brick and mortar way, it's not going to be riddled with traditional age students. It's going to be non-traditional adult learners who are trying to ascend into their careers, or trying to finish something that they started maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago and couldn't finish because of whatever reasons or what have you. And so I think that a lot of what the future of higher education looks like is have to include adult learners, and removing the idea of majors, and replacing it with the ideas of of skills and skill sets, because majors are such a relative thing, right? Because a physics major, certainly that's sort of like a 1 + 1 is 2. But what if I am majoring in theater, right? And so,
Communication.
or
Yeah.
communication, and so we just have to be very, very mindful of what that looks like in the future.
So I have some really wild ideas about what I think higher ed is going to look like. I mean, they are wild. But I know it's not going to look like what it looks like right now, because now that students have literally assigned, they have itemized a value of every single thing that they're getting when they pay tuition and fees. I think it's going to shake things up a lot, because a lot of institutions had to give money back, which means the institutions had to assign a dollar amount to what it really means to be able to go to the rec center, or what it really means to be able to be in a club or an organization. And so basically what we said is, this is what that experience is worth. I'm going to give it back to you. So what's going to happen is students are going to say, you just told me what that was worth. So now I'm going to make some decisions about that, especially Gen Z. So I think it's going to look very different with fee structures. Either it's going to become more ambiguous, or it's going to become very detailed and a la carte, where students will be able to specifically say, I will never step foot in the health center, therefore I will not allow you to bill me for it. I have my own private health insurance. I will go to my own doctor. Something like that. Because a health center fee is an easy grab, right? Every institution charges a health center fee because they'll say, because you have access to it. And I'm not disparaging that. It's great to have that resource on a campus. But I think that a la carte attitude, though, is going to change. It's not an attitude. That a la carte understanding now is going to change things, because the student will say, well, you didn't make me pay that 2020 because I wasn't on campus. Why are you trying to make me pay it now that I'm living in town? I'm still not on campus. So there's that. The other thing, and this is really out of the box, but I really foresee a lot more of the co-educational, co-industry models that you see in the sciences. So way back when we started talking, I mentioned like a 2+2 program for nursing or medical imaging. I kind of see that happening in our business fields. I see students doing 2 years of brick and mortar classroom traditional education, and then the other 2 years is a learning lab experience, because that's what Gen Z is asking for. They're asking for those more concrete, hands-on experiences, and they don't necessarily want to wait, for that internship point. So it's already happening, right? There's a lot of institutions that are embedding classrooms into Google, into Amazon. I mean, these major corporations host multiple universities right in their offices.
There was an
So
education commercial today for Amazon.
see, that's what I mean. Like, those
Today.
are Amazon University. Well, Disney University is the oldest one. So
Yeah.
Disney University has always, I think it's called Mickey Mouse University, actually, has always existed. But that's the model that I see higher ed going to. Honestly, I don't think it's a bad idea, because a lot of it offsets the costs. It really does. It reduce the cost for students, and it increases the business's opportunity to retain talent. So we'll see.
Word, word. And what I see me getting off this adjunct uh, pay. That's what I say. No, I completely agree with you both. And shout out to Nicole Mason, come through BU Huskies. Salute, salute. Shouts to Crystal E. Newbie for tuning in,
Yes, Crystal.
and Juliana for being super active. Listen, I appreciate it. Honestly, I really do. Listen, I thank you both. So, how can people get in contact with you? Give out your contact information if you feel comfortable.
Gonna go first, Dr. Kenny?
Yeah, so I am on Facebook as Dr. Kenny Jones. So doctor is first, and you can
You
also
better.
on on Instagram, Doctor underscore new underscore Ken. Okay, Doctor underscore new Ken, and the E is a 3.
Ah, okay. So a couple ways for me. I think I'm like the only dinosaur that's not on Instagram. I know, don't flame me. But I am more active than I should be on Facebook, but that's okay. So I am on Facebook, and I'm there as my name, Kristin Austin, and my profile picture is brown ballet shoes, because I'm also a classically trained ballet dancer. And so I try to promote representation in that as well. Just another example. So they're brown ballet shoes, Kristin Austin. But then my website, though, is advancewithkristen.com. So that is a very easy way to reach me, and I provide full scope training and diversity inclusion conversations for groups one on, or for small individual one-on-ones, all the way up to, I've done as many as 800. So would love to hear from you and share space with you.
No doubt, no doubt. And you can catch me ideally tomorrow. I thought I had this dope conversation lined up, but speaking of black women in PhD programs, shout out to the homie Stephanie Tisdale, who is at Temple getting a PhD in sociology. I want to say, and so we had this dope, and I'm still gonna say it because I'm gonna speak it into existence. Because she might be. She said, "Listen," she texted me. She said, "Phil, I've never turned in this much late work in my life." right? And I feel her, but
It's a pandemic, babe. It's okay.
we were supposed to have a conversation to the next 4 Thursdays based on James Baldwin, Nikki Giovanni conversation where we show the first 30 minutes and we have a talk back with the people. Either way, I'm gonna be here tomorrow having conversation with the people. She may or may not be joining me. But before I go, let's play our favorite doctor. Right, we gonna play that.
Donation.
Oh, y'all can't see it.
Donation.
Bring it to the front.
Donate.
Cause
It's a sign.
let me see. I'm gonna bring it to the front.
You say it's a sign.
It might be a sign.
It's a sign.
It's a sign. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Cause I need people who are first time tuner-inners to understand what I do on this.
Donation.
Donations.
Donation.
Hashtag
Donation.
LLC. Donations.
Donation.
Gifts.
Donation.
More gifts.
Gifts.
It's appreciated.
Gifts.
Right? Y'all see it.
Gifts.
Red Lobster. That's all
More
a little
gifts.
Bit of, a little
More
bit of
gifts.
white supremacy influence for us to turn that coon chip on. Right. Yo, I appreciate everybody,
Is that what
man.
we doing?
I appreciate. Yo, thank y'all, man. I enjoyed this. Thank y'all so much.